Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Friday, February 2nd. I'm your host, Tom Moore. The Akron game in 211 days. The game against Michigan in 302 days. There's been a lot of good news for Ohio State over the last month or so, especially on the recruiting front. And there could potentially be more coming for the Buckeyes at some point. Steve Wilfong, the well-known 247 national recruiting analyst, put in a crystal ball for the Buckeyes to land Na'eem Offord. He is the number one cornerback in the 2025 class in the 247 composite, and he would be, if he did join the Ohio State class, just the latest in what could be one of, if not the greatest defensive back classes in the history of college football. There, I said it out loud. Now I'm going to let Marc Givler of BuckeyeHuddle.com tell me if I'm completely nuts. Marc, I guess, first of all, they've currently got Devin Sanchez, who's the number 2 cornerback in the class, committed. They have Blake Woodby, who's currently the number 10 cornerback in the class, committed. They have Dorian Brew, who's the number 4 cornerback in the class, at least strongly interested in them. Now you're talking about Na'eem Offord, who's the number 1 cornerback in the class. We'll set the safeties aside for a minute. First of all, is it even realistic to take 4 corners that highly rated? Could you convince 4 guys that highly rated to sign up for the same class all at the same time?
Yeah, I mean, I think you could, because I think Dorian Brew is probably the most likely of the 4 you've mentioned to end up at safety. And I think there's kind of been some talk with him about being kind of that flex guy, that Jordan Hancock type of role. So I think you could make it work. Certainly Ohio State would make it work. The question I think would then be, how does everybody kind of react to that once all of the pieces are in place? Do they eventually, 6 months from now, maybe lose somebody? Maybe a better situation comes up for somebody and they kind of realize, hey, maybe I don't want to be part of this 6-7 defensive back class. Maybe I'll go be the number 1 guy at some other top 10 program. So, I mean, I think that would be a concern, but ultimately Ohio State would make it work, and ultimately I think they could, kind of configure the pieces together, because I do think Dorian Brew is likely to move to safety in college.
All 4 of these guys are from outside of Ohio. Dorian Brew obviously has strong family ties to Ohio, lived in Ohio recently. He's down in Texas now. So is Devin Sanchez. Offord's down in Alabama. Blake Woodby is in Maryland. So this is not last year where you had Bryce West and Aaron Scott, 2 in-state guys, and you could feel pretty good about, hey, they're in. Once they're in, you feel pretty good about the fact they're going to stay in. We are, as you said, 8 months at this point. No, 10 months. Goodness, 10 months away from early signing day. So, there is a long way to go, and only 2 of these guys are even currently committed. But this is I always measure the 2017, the class with Shaun Wade and Jeff Okudah as the best corner class in Ohio State history. It feels like you could get 3 of these 4 guys and be in that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I would say if they do get 3 of those 4 guys, I would probably rank it ahead of that 2017 class, even if it's not Offord, even if it's just Dorian Brew and the 2 they've got already. I think you could certainly make a case there. I think Devin Sanchez is right there as a Jeff Okudah type of caliber prospect. I think a top 10 player in the country type of prospect, and I think Blake Woodby is a better prospect coming out than Marcus Williamson was in that class, and Dorian Brew, I think, is at least in the discussion with Shaun Wade. I think that's an interesting kind of comparison there. I think actually they compare quite closely in terms of their games and everything else. And we know Shaun obviously ended up playing safety by the time it was all said and done with his football career. So, I think it's certainly a possibility. It's a good possibility right now, actually, and it's exciting if you're an Ohio State fan to kind of watch the progression of this secondary under Tim Walton.
And I mentioned Steve Wilfong off the top of the show because he's someone who just is sort of known nationally as, when he puts in a prediction on someone, it's something that moves the needle with other people. And it also is, hey, we're not just making this up just to give you a big splashy headline. We're really legitimately asking this question. What are you hearing on the Na'eem Offord front? Is that an imminent thing? Is that a keep an eye on it thing? What are you hearing about the potential for that recruitment?
Yeah, so he's expected back on campus this weekend. Will be his second trip in the last month and a half, I think. So that's eye-opening. It's certainly interesting. That doesn't happen very often for a lot of kids from the South, especially a kid from Alabama. I think I'm kind of preaching cautious optimism here right now because there's a lot that can change over the course of this recruiting process. But I think right now there are some conditions in place that would make this go from like a pipe dream to an actual possibility. Obviously, the two biggest things right now, Auburn's kind of in a weird place right now. New defensive coordinator, and it was kind of a controversial hire with DJ Durkin. They're not winning a lot right now. Alabama just loses Nick Saban. That's a huge thing. I think that's the thing that has maybe opened this up to being a possibility for Ohio State. So the conditions are there. And of course, Ohio State, what they're doing on the field, what Tim Walton is doing with the corners. So the conditions are right for an unusual situation to go in Ohio State's favor here. They just don't get kids out of Alabama. They just flat out do not out of high school. They just don't. So everything's kind of fallen a certain way for Ohio State to make this like, hey, this could happen. I still have people kind of tell me like, I don't know, like we'll see. And not just like we'll see what he does in the short term, but like, hey, even if something happens for Ohio State here in the next couple of weeks, like, hey, don't put this one in maybe the same ink you would put this like the Tavian St. Clair commitment in. Let's like that's like an early like, hey, they lead now type of situation. So I'm a little more cautious on this one, I think, than maybe some people are right now, but it's definitely in the realm of possibility and something you would have laughed at, I think, 6 months ago.
Well, we've talked in the past about how Ohio State can sort of situationally take advantage of certain regional things. So when Texas was sort of falling apart, they went down to Texas and they got, we mentioned Jeff Okudah earlier, but they got J.K. Dobbins out of there. They got Garrett Wilson out of there. They got Jackson Smith-Njigba out of there. There was in the sort of Mark Richt era, they did the same thing in Georgia and Raekwon McMillan and Von Bell and all sorts of guys like that. This is Alabama has been all caps Alabama since about 2008. Now, for the first time, you've got a little bit of uncertainty. They've obviously taken advantage of that in the portal with Julian Sayin and Caleb Downs. This is a rather unique opportunity, and the window may be somewhat small, but they may have the opportunity to do something like the Texas thing, like the Georgia thing. They may have an opportunity to do something like that here.
Yeah, that's certainly what their hope is. I mean, you've got Offord, you've got Micah DeBose down there in Mobile, who is an Ohio native, but has kind of become ingrained in the Deep South since he's been down there. So you're hoping you can kind of play that. One thing we just don't know yet, and this doesn't necessarily impact what happens in the next few weeks, but it impacts what happens, in December, which is what is Alabama going to look like this fall? Because obviously, like if Kalen DeBoer loses, even if he loses like 3 games, if he doesn't have to go like 7-5 or something like that, but if he loses like 3 games in the fall, I think there's going to be a lot of people who take a step back, recruits and such, that say, look, this is not the same Alabama. And so that may help you hold on to guy. If you do get someone like Na'eem Offord, that may help you hold on to a guy like that. On the other hand, if he kind of keeps things rolling and he can go to a recruit and say, look, we lost these guys at the portal, but look, we still went 11-1, and now we've got all this playing time. That could draw kids who kind of wrote Alabama off, could draw them back in. So I think a lot will depend. I think a huge domino in this entire national landscape this year will be how Kalen DeBoer's first year goes at Alabama. I really think that. So, and Ohio State will be affected by that just because of it, not just recruiting Alabama, but recruiting kids from Atlanta and so in Florida. Like this will affect Ohio State in a number of states. It will affect a number of top programs. But yes, the conditions are such right now that there is a slim, kind of small window of opportunity here that Ohio State is going to try and cash in on.
Well, cornerback is not the only place that they have some pretty significant irons in the fire here. We got to move back to the safety spot, and we'll see if Dorian Brew, if he commits and if he ends up there. But they're in on a couple other really, really highly ranked safeties as well. Faheem Delane, the number 1 safety in the nation out of Maryland. Trey McNutt, the number 4 safety in the nation, son of legendary McNutt for Heisman, Richard McNutt, who, boy, in the era of NFL and NIL would have done quite well for himself, and now his son could be in that legacy as well. So where do you think Ohio State stands with one or both of those? I mean, what are the odds that land over under? Give me over under 1.5 of those guys end up in the class here.
Today, I would probably say over. I think they're getting Trey McNutt. Put that's one. I'm pretty confident they're getting Trey McNutt. Right now, they're in the top 2 with Delane. It's Ohio State and Oregon right now. Is that going to be the end of it and that's it? And it's just Ohio State and Oregon? No, I don't think so. I think that kid is a special safety. I think a lot of teams are going to make their pitches to him over the next 6 to 8 months. But they, the Perry Eliano departure kind of I think caught him off guard. But they have immediately cleaned that up. Been just aggressive, constant communication with Faheem since kind of the staff shakeup. I think they're doing a great job there. He's close with Blake Woodby. I know Devin Sanchez is starting to work that thing, and so they're starting to all kind of talk about, hey, let's build the secondary together. And so I would give Ohio State the slight edge over Oregon right now. So I would give it, if it's they're going to get McNutt, and then it's maybe greater than 50% they're going to get Delane right now. So that would be my take on this. So I would lean toward the over, knowing that Delane is not going to just be a quiet thing here. No matter what happens in the next couple months, that's going to be one you've got to protect all the way.
Finally, I just wanted to kind of hit on this a little bit because they've had a ton of success in recruiting in the secondary. And, everyone in Michigan wants to say, well, they're just buying the players. And I think the folks in Columbus want to tell you that Tim Walton is doing an incredible job. But I think now have success to point to, which with, the secondary last year was pretty darn good. You got just about everyone back. You add Caleb Downs to that mix. This should be a pretty darn good secondary again. Denzel Burke is probably in a pretty good spot NFL-wise a year from now. We'll see, Jordan Hancock could be in a pretty good spot. David Nigmanosin, Caleb Downs could be 2 years away from being in a pretty good spot. I mean, you've got a lot of guys who could be, standing up there shaking Roger Goodell's hand relatively early in the draft process. So how much of the success right now and the general positive trend in the secondary is NIL versus Tim Walton versus on-field success versus development success? How do you stack all those things together?
Yeah, I think the number one thing is the on-field success. I think the number 2 is Tim Walton. I think number 3 is NIL. I think certainly Ohio State has made efforts to better streamline the NIL process. The collectives have done a good job with that. I think, look, I downplayed that Ohio State was losing every kid they lost was NIL for a year and a half, and it got very annoying. And now it's kind of swung into another equally annoying direction, which is, they're just buying everybody. Well, neither of those things was ever true. So what has happened on the field with the secondary the last year or two under Tim Walton has been the biggest thing. In fact, if Caleb Downs was coming out of high school in 24 or 25, he would go to Ohio State. That's where he wanted to go the first time. But he was deciding between the absolute train wreck of a secondary Ohio State had put on the field the previous 2 years and Nick Saban. And that was just too much for Ohio State to overcome at the end of the day. If Downs had 2 years of the data we have now on Tim Walton and what they've done with the secondary, he would have committed to Ohio State in high school. So that's why it's the biggest thing. That for me is why the biggest thing is what they've done on the field. That's what Devin Sanchez saw. And then again, the second thing is Tim Walton is doing a great job of building relationships, but he did a great job of that the first time around with Downs and didn't get him until he was able to show him on the field what they're doing.
Well, the 2023 Ohio State secondary was pretty darn good. 2024 seems like it's trending to be better. And boy, 2025, 2026, this could be a pretty interesting Ohio State secondary moving forward as well. And they're pretty darn good at some other spots as well. So boy, is this shaping up to be an interesting year in Ohio State football, Ohio State recruiting, Ohio State transfer portaling, Ohio State everything else. And a great place to join us to talk about all of that stuff is at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Tony, Kevin, and I covering the team, Mark covering recruiting. Got our full team of X's and O's gurus making you a smarter football fan. very lively board on the Huddle board presented by Jeff Ruby Steakhouse, all at BuckeyeHuddle.com. We hope to see you there. We hopefully we'll see you at youtube.com/BuckeyeHuddle. If you're watching this on YouTube, go ahead and hit that thumbs up button. It will help other folks find these shows. We also appreciate it if you'd check in and hit the subscribe button, hit the thumbs up button. All that good stuff will help you make sure you never miss an episode. When news breaks, we are pretty much always almost instantly there. You can be there as well. Just be subscribed at youtube.com/BuckeyeHuddle. That will do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We will talk to you tomorrow.